Well, welcome everyone. Very lovely to have you all here this morning, and our beautiful little friends at the beginning as well that wanted to share their presence with us. It's quite lovely because before I got into A Course in Miracles, I had always felt I would be destined to be giving talks, and so in preparation, because I was very much like David in terms of qualities. I was very shy, and I would stumble over my words when I would be speaking to anyone. I wouldn't really speak to anyone because I was that shy. And so after high school, the spirit kind of got me into online gaming and streaming online and commentating the games to help just vocalize what I wanted to share and help unwind from the shyness. So I got a lot of trolls back then as well. So it's beautiful, you know, because what happened this morning was just a beautiful reflection of like, I was like, oh wow, I've had this before. Very beautiful when I was streaming online the games back then before I found the course, that you know I was being unwound from all of that, and it was very beautiful just to be able to have that experience again this morning and just have no reaction or nothing come up, where previously 5 years ago that was a different story. Okay, everyone. So this morning, the topic that came to mind was talking about what is forgiveness really. And before we find the course, or before we find any spiritual teaching, you know, we have our own definition of forgiveness, and that's normally the world's or the ego's definition of forgiveness. And that definition of forgiveness is, I am forgiving my brother for what they have done. Someone comes along and attacks me and I says, oh no, I buy into the drama, I buy into the reactions. And then after the situation seems to happen, then I have to have this period of forgiving the other person for what they did to me. But as we know, A Course in Miracles is basically flipping that around 180 degrees and going, we are forgiving for what they have not done. And that is what we will be looking at in today's Zoom group. The definition of forgiveness according to A Course in Miracles versus how we seem to go about forgiveness in terms of the world. And so to start off with, I have the section in the Course in Miracles that's called What is Forgiveness? And if you want to read along, this section is just before lesson 221. So this is from the workbook. What is forgiveness? Forgiveness recognizes what you thought your brother did to you has not occurred. It does not pardon sins and make them real. It sees there was no sin, and in that view are all your sins forgiven. What is sin except a false idea about God's Son? Forgiveness merely sees its falsity, and therefore lets it go. What then is free to take its place is now the will of God. An unforgiving thought is one which makes a judgment that it will not raise to doubt, although it is not true. The mind is closed and will not be released. The thought protects projection, tightening its change so that distortions are more veiled and more obscure, less easily accessible to doubt, and further kept from reason. What can come between a fixed projection and the aim that it has chosen as its wanted goal? An unforgiving thought does many things. In frantic action, it pursues its goal, twisting and overturning what it sees as interfering with its chosen path. Distortion is its purpose, and the means by which it would accomplish it as well. It sets about its furious attempts to smash reality without concern for anything that would appear to pose a contradiction to its point of view. Now, this is probably the most favorite section of the course. It says, forgiveness, on the other hand, is still and quietly does nothing. It offends no aspect of reality, nor seeks to twist it to appearances it likes. It merely looks, waits, and judges not. How beautiful. He who would not forgive must judge, for he must justify his failure to forgive. But he who would forgive himself must learn to welcome truth exactly as it is. Do nothing, then, and let forgiveness show you what to do. Through him who is your guide, your savior and protector, strong in hope and certain of your ultimate success. He has forgiven you already, for such is his function given him by God. Now must you share his function and forgive whom he has saved, whose sinlessness he sees, and whom he honors as the Son of God. Now that is a very beautiful section to read because it has many layers in that. And I particularly love this line that says, forgiveness, on the other hand, is still and quietly does nothing. And the reason why that line is so important is because whenever we think of any action we seem to do, whether it's going to the toilet, whether it's speaking to someone, whether it's thinking of an idea and putting that into action, whenever we think of any goal, there's often a association with that goal of doing. You have to do something in order to reach that goal. And forgiveness initially can be the same thing when we are going through the initial lessons of A Course in Miracles. Forgiveness seems like it's an action. It seems like I have to forgive all of these egoic thoughts that are arising in my awareness, and then I will be peaceful. And then I will reach the state that's called enlightenment in the future. But what this course is reminding us is that forgiveness, on the other hand, is still and quietly does nothing. And that's beautiful because it implies that forgiveness is really a non-action. It's not really an action. It's really just another way of perceiving. And so initially, when we grow up in the world, certainly for myself, because I had a lot of religious background, not for myself, but for my family. And my family, has all sorts of religions like Jehovah's Witness, Christian, you name it. It's in our family. And so when I was growing up, I had all of these versions of what forgiveness was, but I never really felt pulled to go in that direction. There was something off, and I didn't quite know what it was. And I would often read the Bible quotes of, how Jesus would say, forgive 70 times 7. But then I would forgive 70 times 7 and more, and I still wouldn't feel happy. And I'd be like, what the heck is going on here? I must be doing something wrong. And so, when we're going through the world's learning and the world's teaching of what forgiveness is, we can begin to understand that in terms of the world's definition of forgiveness, it implies that your brother has done something wrong. And I don't know about you, but if you've been in a relationship and you're implying that your partner has done something wrong when they haven't done anything wrong at all, they're going to get very upset at you. You know, try going through a relationship, and even though your partner hasn't done anything wrong at all, you hold a grudge against them, and then finally say, "I have forgiven you," and they're like, "I haven't done anything at all." And that's not really going to work at all. And so when we're growing up in the world, we tend to forgive as though something has done something to us. We make the error real first, and then we attempt to forgive it. But what A Course in Miracles is saying here is that in order to truly forgive, we want to be able to first not make the error real, because Jesus says in the Course that the only reason why you find forgiveness so difficult beginning off with is because you think you are forgiving the truth rather than forgiving illusion. And so what does this mean? Well, in reality, because Jesus knows that the separation never happened, he knows that whatever is happening on the movie screen isn't really happening. And so to use the analogy of a movie on a theater screen, I want you just to imagine yourself going into a movie theater. You're walking into a movie theater, you sit down, and all of a sudden there's the white screen. This is before the movie even starts. You sit down and there's a white screen. Is there any images on the screen just yet? No, there's not. But all of a sudden, the projector turns on behind you and projects this massive universe right in front of your eyes. And all of a sudden, there are images on the screen. And then you've got bombs going off, you've got drama, you've got thrillers, you've got comedies, you have all of these genres of images exploding on the screen. And you're sitting there and you're reacting to the movie screen as if it's real, and someone's going into the basement and you're yelling, "Don't go in the basement," even though it's just images on the screen. And all of a sudden, the movie ends. Boom, and the projector turns off. Boom, and all of a sudden, it's just the white screen again. Now, we are using this analogy because when we are watching the movie, we tend to think that the images that are being watched are real, that they are really there. And what Jesus is basically saying is our whole idea of forgiveness is so backwards that when we try to forgive truth, it's not going to work. We have to forgive illusions. We have to forgive the ego. The ego can be the only thing that can be forgiven because the ego is unreal. And this is the same as saying, using the movie screen analogy, we want to remember that the only truth to the movie is the white movie theater screen underneath all of the images. The images that are being projected from the projector behind us onto the movie screen are just false appearances. They are false images that are temporarily there on the movie screen, but they are not really there. We can call them an illusion in this sense. And so whenever the mind is forgiving something, we want to be able to recognize that the only thing that can be forgiven is illusion, is the temporary. And so, for example, from my life, when I was going through the course, when I was going through the lessons, my mind was very focused on the level of the perception, on the world, so to speak. And so all of a sudden I'll be like, Jesus, man, there seems to be 1,000 things to forgive a day. When you're going through your day, it seems like there's like 1,000 things to forgive. You got to forgive your brother, you got to forgive the cat, you got to forgive whatever it may be. There seems like there's just branches and leaves and just 1,000 things, and you're like, Jesus, how am I going to forgive all of this? If you want me to be peaceful, like how am I going to get all of these things, these stacks of things to forgive? And so Jesus would say, well, through following guidance, my attention would be slowly taken off of the level of perception, back to the level of emotions that were underneath the perception, back to the thoughts and beliefs that were underneath the emotions and perceptions. And then Jesus would say, forgiveness is only for the level of the mind. It's not for anything beyond the level of the mind. What this means is when the mind is focused on the level of perception, especially for me at this point in time, I was like, how can I forgive everything? You're saying I have to forgive everything, but everything in my mind at that point in time seemed like I have to forgive my brother. I have to forgive the cat because the cat is making me angry. I have to forgive the weather because the weather is making me angry. But Jesus is like, slowly, you're going to follow my guidance, and this is going to be used in a way where your attention is going to be so swept up in joy that your attention is not going to be on the form anymore. And so I would begin to follow guidance. Now, the guidance at this point in time was just little nudges. Whenever I use the word guidance, the ego seems to come in and think of like streams of thought, like very clear streams of thought, as if you can hear an audible voice that, is going to dispel all doubt, and the heavens are going to open up, and it's going to be like, oh, Juliana, go to Mexico. But at this point in time, the intuitive guidance for me was just more of feeling, and it was more of like tickles in the heart, and it was more of like, oh, this feels good. So this is what I began to follow. And the more I followed these intuitive nudges, the more it kind of felt joyful. And I was like, wow, this is a totally different experience that I haven't even opened up myself up to before. And so I would begin to follow the guidance, and over time, seemingly on the timeline, my attention seemed to be taken off of perception back to the emotions and thoughts, so I could begin mind watching. So I could begin just observing the thoughts and the emotions and the perceptions. So I could begin to get in touch with the beliefs that were underneath the thoughts. And so from this point on, Jesus says, great. Now we have the opportunity to get in touch with the two purposes on the mind level. There are only ever two purposes on the mind level. All of the seeming choices on the level of perception are just a projection of these two choices on the mind level. While the mind is split and misidentified with the ego, there's going to be two choices on the mind level. No matter what word you use, whether it's ego, Holy Spirit, love, or fear, there are only ever two choices until you have forgiven the ego on the level of the mind. And so Jesus would say to me, great. Now you have this beautiful garden, but this garden at the moment has a lot of weeds in the garden. So we need to get in touch with what is weeds and what is actually flowers. So we can uproot the weeds and clean out the garden to leave only the flowers. And so Jesus would say to me, well, this is your time of discernment now. Here we are going to discern between what is true and what is false. And what is an example of this? Well, when we are in that space of mind watching, before we take the step of forgiving the ego entirely, the mind has to discern between what is false and what is true, what is ego and what is coming from the voice for God or the true self. And so an example of this is I'm going through my day, and all of a sudden I feel upset because of I'm in the space of mind watching. I can pinpoint the thought underneath the upset, and this thought is, wow, my brother left the door open. They should not have left the door open, and now I am upset. And Jesus is like, good. This is beautiful that it's coming up. We want this to come up because our purpose is peace. Our purpose is forgiveness for the goal of peace. And so this coming up is very sweet and very great. And so now we're going to look at it together. How do we look at this together? Well, we want to bring this thought, well, my brother has left the door open, so they are, whatever word the ego wants to use, stupid, for example. And Jesus is going to ask you, well, who is actually saying this? Is it the voice for God saying this? Or is it the ego saying this? And you now, through your own prayer, through your own insights and intuition, are going to have the opportunity to just start to discern between what is actually the ego and what is actually not the ego. Because in order to come to consistent peace, you first have to look at the darkness. You first have to look at what is not you in order to reveal what you actually are. So it's more of a process of elimination or negation rather than the process of learning more spiritual concepts, more spiritual knowledge in order to become enlightened. You can see how forgiveness is more of a subtraction in order to reveal what you already are rather than a going forward and gaining something. And so in my experience, in my own prayer time, I'd be like, okay, I notice this thought is coming from the ego. What now? And Jesus is saying, beautiful, beautiful. So now you can see that this thought is coming from the ego. And so you are upset because you are believing the ego's thoughts. And I'll go, yes, yes, okay. But what is underneath that? And Jesus would say, great, now we can begin touching on the beliefs that are underneath that thought. So using the movie theater screen analogy again, the mind is going to have many thoughts about the images that are coming up on the screen. But the underlying belief that underlies all of the thoughts about the movie theater screen is the one assumption that this screen, the images on the screen are actually there. How can you have any reaction or any annoyance or any upset around the images on the screen unless you thought they were actually there? And this is what Jesus is starting to point at with forgiveness. He's slowly bringing your attention off of the level of perception back to mind watching, so then the mind can start to discern between the ego and what is not the ego. And slowly through your own experience and insights, you're going to have, you're going to go deeper, shall we say, into the core of the ego. Now, initially, forgiveness starts off as, man, I need to forgive my brother. Now, coming back to the level of the mind, it comes back to, okay, I seem to be having an egoic thought arising in my awareness. That is okay, because that's the whole point of forgiveness. And so now that there is an ego thought in awareness, how do I go from annoyance to peace? And Jesus is basically saying here, another word for forgiveness can be stated as overlooking. So forgiveness and overlooking go together. Another word we have in English here is not giving any mind to something. So when you say, don't give any mind to your neighbor, what that is basically saying is don't give any attention to your neighbor. You know, you just keep on going with your own thing and don't give any attention to your neighbor. So what Jesus is basically saying with forgiveness here is you don't need to try and get rid of the ego in order to be peaceful. You just need to see the false as false, in which the mind can then overlook. It can then forgive. It can then give no mind to the ego. So there may be an arising thought of the ego, but Jesus is basically saying you can overlook it. You can give it no attention. You don't have to jump on that train just because there's a thought arising in your awareness. He's saying it's okay to be there. Forgiveness is not trying to get rid of that thought in order to be peaceful. Jesus is saying, in order to be peaceful, you need to overlook the ego. You need to not give any attention. You need to not give no heed to the ego. And so initially, as I said before, forgiveness goes from forgiving our brother to starting to see that I need to forgive the ego in my mind in order to be truly helpful. If a computer has a virus, you need to get rid of that virus in order for the computer to be running smoothly again. And that analogy is pointing to that the ego is seemingly the virus that's in the mind. Now, we need to get rid of this virus, seemingly, metaphorically, in order, well, not get rid of, but we need to forgive the ego, the virus in the mind, so that the natural being underneath the ego that is ever present can be revealed, so that the kingdom of heaven that is always there as your true self can be revealed. And so we'll come back to this a little bit later on when we touch on that point very soon. And so as we are still discerning between the ego and the Holy Spirit, we're going to have lots of opportunities throughout the day to be able to just begin to ask, who is really saying this? Because I can guarantee you the mind's upset always comes from a failure to forgive. Problems and forgiveness don't go hand in hand. Problems and failure to forgiving goes hand in hand. The reason that is because if you overlook the problem, you wouldn't have a problem anymore. However, for myself as well, in my own experience, it took me on a timeline ages to actually experience what forgiveness was. I thought I was forgiving, but was I really forgiving? And looking back on it, I can say I wasn't. Because I wasn't really clear on what forgiveness was at that point in time. And so I would try my best of what I thought forgiveness was. But if the mind truly forgives, then the mind will not have a problem ever again. And so this is why forgiveness is such an important topic, because I can guarantee you when the mind gets very clear on what forgiveness is and experiences the release of forgiveness, this is going to be the key to every single problem there is. And I can guarantee you, there's only one problem. And that is the ego on the mind level. And the solution to that is forgiveness. Jesus is not saying, well, there seems to be a time lapse between the problem and the solution. There doesn't seem to be a gap between the ego and forgiveness. What Jesus is really pointing to here is that it would be really cruel for God to place the answer in a future goal. What Jesus is really saying is that the seeming problem and the seeming solution are right next to each other on the level of the mind. But the mind has been so trained to keep going towards the problem that it overlooks forgiveness and goes, I want the problem, I want the problem, I want the problem. Why am I so unhappy? I keep choosing the problem, but I'm so unhappy. And Jesus is there laughing because he basically sees what's going on. He says, beloved, come back with me. We're going to choose again. And so as we're going through our day, we're going to have lots of opportunities to begin to get in touch with who is actually saying. What is the source of this thought, shall we say? And so no matter what will be coming up, whether it's, man, I'm so stupid, man, I'm so gullible, whatever the thought may be, we can always bring it back to who is saying this. Is this coming from the voice for God? Or as David says, he says, you can put saith the Lord after the thought. So you can say, man, I'm so stupid, saith the Lord. Now that seems about silly, wouldn't it? Sound a bit silly. The Lord wouldn't be saying that. And so it becomes quite obvious that it's the ego saying that. And so Jesus is basically saying, once you get clear on what thoughts are coming from what, you begin through mind watching, you start to see, wow, my mind is full of false thoughts. What I thought were my thoughts are not really my thoughts at all. The thoughts that I seem to misidentify with and call mine are really the ego's thoughts. And my mind seems to be so full of the ego's thoughts. My mind is just constantly ego thought, ego thought, ego thought, ego thought. And that is okay. Jesus is saying that's beautiful because now we have the opportunity to choose again. Now we have the opportunity to overlook all of the branches and leaves on a tree. We want to go for the trunk. We want to be looking at the trunk, because if we are trying to forgive all of the leaves and all of the branches on the tree, you can see it's going to take a very long time from a timeline perspective, rather than just going straight to the trunk and forgiving the trunk and the entire tree. Because if you can forgive the trunk, then you don't need to worry about all of the branches that stem from the trunk and the leaves which stem from the branches which extend from the trunk. And so what is this trunk that Jesus is pointing to? Well, this trunk is the false belief in separation. With the help of Jesus, with the help of your internal guide and your inner wisdom, you are going to be led from the level of perception back to mind watching, so then you can begin to discern between the ego and the Holy Spirit. And this discerning is going to lead you deeper and deeper into seeing that the core of the ego is the false belief of separation. Now, what does this actually mean? We can use the word separation, but what does separation actually mean? Well, I'll give you an example of this. Using the movie analogy, you go into a movie theater, you sit down, and in the beginning, there is only the white screen. Now, in the Bible, this says, in the beginning, there was only light. Except I'm just going to paraphrase using this analogy and say, in the beginning, there was only the white movie theater screen. And then there seemed to creep a tiny mad idea in which the son forgot to laugh. It forgot to laugh at that insane idea that seemed to creep into the mind of God. And then all of a sudden, the projector turns on, and all of a sudden, there are images on the wall now. And so the mind that is in total amnesia about heaven, which is that white movie theater screen prior to the images, has totally forgotten about the movie theater screen, and now is so caught up in the explosion of images that it thinks that it's on the movie screen now. And then from this false belief that thinking that you are on the movie screen comes all of the problems: relationship problems, financial problems, economic problems, worldly problems, save the animals, climate change. And all of a sudden, you're trying to fix all of the problems on the movie screen, thinking that you're on the movie screen. Why would you have so much reaction watching a movie unless you thought that the movie screen, the images on the movie screen, were real? And this is the same as saying the false belief in separation. That's what the false belief in separation is. On the level of the mind, it can be called the ego. On the level of emotions, it can be described as the unsettling roller coaster of emotions. And project, because we know that the ego likes to project, this belief in separation gets projected from the level of the mind out and creates this big bang of a world that we seem to call the universe. But just like in a nighttime dream, where is the dreamscape? Where is the dream figure? But in the mind of the dreamer. And so it's all happening within the mind of the dreamer, using a nighttime dream analogy. There is nothing separate from mind. There is nothing apart from mind. Another way of restating this is Jesus says, ideas leave not their source. What does this mean? Well, ideas leave not their source means that there is real There's really no separate universe in a nighttime dream apart from your mind. It hasn't left the projector, which is the dreamer of the dream. And so while in a nighttime dream, you seem to forget you are dreaming, you take the contents of the dream to be real. And then you start reacting to what's going on in the dream. And all of a sudden you wake up frantically and you're like, I just had a biggest nightmare ever. But did you? Did you actually have a nightmare? What actually happened? Did it actually happen? No. There was just the appearance of images in the mind during the nighttime sleep state, which then the mind reacted to. If there's no body in the nighttime dream, who is reacting? Who is actually seeing the nighttime dream? Wow, I've never thought of that before. If there's no body, who is actually seeing the nighttime dream? Wow, it must be the mind. Now, I've had friends that write to me all the time and they say, well, Dylan, I had this out-of-body experience and I was in the corner of the room. What the hell was going on there? And I would reply back to them and say, yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's beautiful. You have that experience every single night. You dream. Is there a body in that dream that can perceive, or is it actually the mind perceiving and seems to be located between the body's head, between the body's eyes as a, what's the word for it? I've forgotten the word, but it will come back to me. As a way to try and trick you into, I am this body. And so you can see how all of this is like a kind of like a spider web, and all of it connects together. So we can't really forgive unless we first begin to see the spider web in its entirety. In order, before we start to truly forgive, we need to overlook the branches and begin to look at the trunk. And so Jesus is basically saying, you have never had any financial problems. You have never had any economic problems. You have never had any relationship problems because you have never been on the screen. Anytime you are worried about what's going to happen tomorrow with money, with your rent, how am I going to pay the rent? Jesus is saying, no, you believe you are in the world. You believe that there are images really happening and that you need now and you're trying to rearrange the chairs on the Titanic, thinking that that's going to solve the problem. But the real problem, well, the seeming problem that there only is in the level of the mind. Believing that you are on the movie theater screen, believing that the contents of the dream are really happening. And Jesus is saying, we are beginning now to unwind from that. We are beginning to now unwind from all of the multitude of problems that seem to be in the world and bringing the sole problem back to this belief in separation in the mind. And this is what the core of the ego is. So anytime you feel upset, anytime you feel distress in terms of the world, you can say it to yourself, wow, I am just looking at my belief in separation. That's all that is being witnessed in the world. Because we know that the world is a projection of the level of the mind, whatever we seem to be seeing in the world is just a reflection of our state of mind. So if I am upset in any way, I can remind myself, I am just witnessing, or as Jesus says, I am bearing false witness in the Bible to the belief in separation. And so from this point, what I love about Jesus is he doesn't even stop there. He goes, okay, great. We're going prior to that belief in separation. We're going prior to the trunk. We're going to get in there. We're going to, As David says, we have this noisy blender that's going on. We're going to reach for the cord and we're going to unplug the cord once and for all. And this is where the experience of consistent peace comes in. Because I don't know about you, but if you start to see something, you start to step out of it. For example, if you have KFC for a month, you're going to get sick of having KFC after a while. And so the more and more you start to look at the ego, you're going to be like, I'm catching on to your tricks now, ego. You can't pull me in anymore. And so the more you begin to look at the ego, the more it disappears from your awareness. Being illusion, it's an illusion. So the more you look at fear, the more it seems to not be there in your awareness anymore. And so the more you seem to look at and forgive the branches and the trees, the more you are brought to looking at this trunk. And as you look at the trunk, you see it for what it is, and you see it as an illusion. And the mind must be able to see illusion as illusion first before what is real is left shining like the sun is behind the storm that seems to be arising in the sky. Now, the sun is always there, but while the storm clouds are in awareness, it seems like the sun is hidden temporarily. But that does not mean that the sun is not there at all. And so I want to begin reading now the section from A Course in Miracles that's called The Responsibility for Sight. You can't experience consistent peace unless you first take responsibility for what you are seeing. And I'm not talking about taking responsibility so you can blame yourself, so you can whip yourself, because that's just the ego. What I'm talking about now is taking responsibility because you know you have the opportunity to choose again for love. You know you have the opportunity to choose again for your divine innocence. That is prior to the ego. That is prior to the guilt. And so I'll be reading from chapter 21 of the text. This is called Reason, and chapter 21, The Responsibility of Sight. And I'm going to start from paragraph 2. This is the only thing that you need do for vision, for happiness, for release from pain and the complete escape from sin. All to be given you. Say only this, but mean it with no reservations, for here the power of salvation lies. I am responsible for what I see. I choose the feelings I experience, and I decide upon the goal I would achieve. And everything that seems to happen to me, I ask for and receive as I have asked. Deceive yourself no longer that you are helpless in the face of what is being done to you. Acknowledge but that you have been mistaken, and all effects of your mistakes will disappear. Now, this is beautiful because this is beginning to touch on what Jamuna was talking about at the beginning, about feeling unfairly treated. But the end of this is, and everything that seems to happen to me, I ask for and receive as I have asked. And so we can begin to say, well, if everything that seems to happen to me, I ask for and I receive as I have asked, is it even possible for me to be unfairly treated? And so we can begin to bring the feelings that we are having to the light of awareness, to the light of truth, to the light of love, to the light of the inner wisdom within. And we can begin to say, well, if everything is my decision, and I am experiencing everything that I ask, is it even possible to be a victim of the world? Is it possible to be a victim of anything if I am choosing and experiencing everything that I have asked for? And so while the mind is misidentified with the ego, it's going to seem like it's a victim. It's going to seem like there are many problems. It's going to seem like there are a multitude of things to be fearful about. Oh, I may not get the money to pay the rent. Fear. But what if the mind that is experiencing problems and upset wants to be upset? Whoa, how about that? The mind that is experiencing upset wants to be upset. Why does it want to be upset? Because it is afraid of love. It is afraid of stillness. It is afraid of the love of God. And it is so afraid that just like Simba in the movie The Lion King, when Scar tells Simba, oh, you've killed your father now, you better run. Why does Simba run? Because he believes he has killed his father. He believes he has separated from his father. And now the guilt arises from that. So instead of looking at the false belief of separation in the mind, the ego goes, oh my God, you've separated from your father. You've separated from love. You're separated from peace. You better not go back there, because if you do, you're going to be struck down. Just as Simba doesn't go back to Pride Rock because he believes he's going to face punishment for killing his father. And so he decides to run and eat bugs rather than be the rightful heir of the Pride Rock. And so the mind that is experiencing any form of lack of peace actually wants that. And it wants that because it believes that if it goes back and looks at this false belief in separation, it is going to be so traumatic, it is going to be so deadly, that it would rather play small with upset, with problems, with whatever it may be in the world to keep it distracted. And Jesus is basically saying, my beloved, your whole idea of coming back to this one belief in separation is based off the ego's idea of coming back to that idea. Now the ego is going to say, you're going to be smited, you're going to be obliterated. But Jesus is saying, well, that's true for the ego, because if you come back to this one, to the core premise, the ego is not going to exist anymore. But you're going to remember your innocence, because you never separated from love. You never separated from heaven. Just as when you fall asleep at night and have a nighttime dream, you are still at home in your bed. You didn't actually leave home to have that nighttime dream. And so Jesus is saying, you're innocent. You're still at home in God, dreaming of exile. But you didn't actually leave home. You didn't actually separate from your father. You didn't do anything wrong. And Jesus is saying, come back to me. I love you so much. I could not even have anyone, I could not have an unloving thought against you. That's how much I love you. That's how much you are divinely innocent. Because your father overlooks error. That is what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is overlooking the error. And if you have a little child that comes to you and, you know, it accidentally says the F word because it's learned the F word, are you going to punish that child? Or are you going to be like, oh, darling? Are you going to overlook that mistake and love it unconditionally? Are you going to overlook the mistake? That's what love is. Love is overlooking error in order to love unconditionally. Using this analogy, it's about overlooking the mistake of a child and loving the child unconditionally, because that love is what is going to teach the child, not punishment. And so what is going to change that child except through going, wow, I love you so much. You can't do anything wrong. I love you so much that no matter what you do, it has no consequence. And that is what Jesus is saying. You are so divinely loved, you are so divinely innocent, that this is what you're going to experience when you forgive the tree trunk, when you overlook the ego entirely, when you have discerned between what is ego and what is not the ego, between what is weeds and what is flowers, and you discard of the weeds, you're going to be left with the flowers. You're going to be left with this beautiful garden that's fruitful. And that is what Jesus is saying in terms of forgiveness. He is saying, if you come back to the original idea of separation and see the false as false, that is what forgiveness is, seeing the false as false. Using this analogy again with the movie theater, if you overlook the images on the movie screen and have this vision and this knowledge that you know without a doubt that there is a movie screen underneath the images that is unchanging, and that you are this movie screen that is unchanging and unharmed by any of the images that are appearing on the screen, will you be upset ever again? Will you experience attack ever again? No, because attack to the unchanging movie theater screen is unknown of. Attack is only in the changing images on the movie theater screen. And so Jesus is saying, if you are able to overlook all of the different images that seem to be playing on the screen, and you come back prior to those images, to that just beautiful and serene movie theater screen that was there even prior to the images, you are going to be unshakable. Your peace will not be disturbed anymore because you will know who you truly are. Now, the ego's version of that is, no, you are an image on that movie theater screen. And you need to protect this image. You need to work for this image. You need to get a house. You need to basically work to pay for 4 walls that surround this image in order to keep it surviving throughout the movie. And the Spirit is basically saying, if you are more than welcome to let all of that go. That is nonsense. There is a lesson that says, I will step back and let him lead the way. This means that you are more than capable of, more than capable, actually. It's inevitable that your mind will be so taken off of what is happening on the movie theater screen that things will just be added onto you to keep the movie flowing while you need to experience that movie. Jesus says that the script is written. And so what this is basically saying is, you don't need to worry about the survival of the body anymore. You can take your attention off of the worries, off of the concerns, off of the problems of the movie theater screen, and you can just place your attention on what is underneath the movie theater screen, which is the unchanging, pure, pristine, innocent movie theater screen, rather than the images. And the instant that you overlook these images is the instant that you remember your divine innocence. This is the instant where you remember that you are loved no matter what. And that no image on this movie theater screen has the potential or ability to change the movie theater screen ever. It's nonsense. No one ever walks out of a movie and says, oh my God, that bomb that happened in the movie totally damaged the movie theater screen. We need to totally replace it now. No one in history has ever done that. And so that is the experience of forgiveness. It is a fruitful experience, because once the ego is forgiven and overlooked, you're left with the flowers. You're left with the fruits. You're left with the kingdom within that has always been there. It just has seemed to be obscured through the conditioning of what I am. Someone tooted in our driveway. And so another way of restating forgiveness is actually seeing that it's impossible for the separation to have occurred. It's impossible that the contents of the dream have any existence in and of themselves. If you are lucid within the dream, you experience lucid dreaming. You know without a doubt that you are dreaming and that the contents within the dream that you are experiencing are not real. It is just false appearances. And that is the experience that we are beginning to awaken to. First, one must awaken to the dreamer of the dream perspective before one awakens to the Christ. Now, the difference between the two is one is lucid dreaming, and once one overlooks the dream entirely, the Christ sees the dream as impossible. And therefore, the only experience of this is consistent love. Because if you overlook the ego on the level of the mind, what choice is there now? There's no choice anymore. It's just choiceless awareness. Choiceless awareness means that there's no other to choose between. Where before there was an ego to choose between, which provided the contrast of swinging back and forth. When you, with the help of intuitive guidance or your inner wisdom, overlook the ego entirely, you are only left with the flowers, with choiceless awareness, with the experience of peace. There's no swinging back anymore. There's just the experience of peace and nothing else. No matter what seems to be happening on the movie theater screen, because this experience of peace is unconditional. There are no conditions being placed upon. Where with the ego, you could see how many conditions were being placed. I will be peaceful and happy when I get money in the bank. That is a condition. But Jesus is unwinding the mind from the ego to see that peace is an experience without any condition. It is unconditional. It is an experience where you are able to say to your brother, I love you without any conditions. You can be whatever way you want to be, but I will love you no matter what. And the image I have in my mind now is Jesus's face with his big smile, and he's just laughing there going, Jesus is able to see the false as false, and with his help, seemingly, as if there is another to help you, you are going to enter this experience where you can say, I love you no matter what. Because one, you have forgiven yourself, you have forgiven the ego in your own mind, and therefore you accept your true self exactly as you are. And therefore, because you have forgiven yourself and you accept yourself, this radiates outwards. And you can accept everyone exactly as they are now because you accept yourself exactly as you are. You have forgiven yourself. And so I might just end on the section, what is forgiveness, again, just to go through it again one last time from this point of what we have just talked about, and see what comes up for you. Listen to the sweetness. Listen to the innate gratitude that we are given another way to experience each seeming moment. And so this is from workbook. What is forgiveness? Just prior to lesson 221. Forgiveness recognizes what you thought your brother did to you has not occurred. It does not pardon sins and make them real. It sees that there was no sin. and in that view are all of your sins forgiven. What is sin, which is really just an error in perceiving, being the ego, except a false idea about God's Son? Forgiveness merely sees its falsity, and therefore lets it go. What then is free to take its place is now the will of God, being abstract happiness, unconditional love. An unforgiving thought is one which makes a judgment that it will not raise to doubt, although it is not true. The mind is closed and will not be released. The thought protects projection, tightening its change, so that distortions are more veiled and more obscure, less easily accessible to doubt, and further kept from reason. What can come between a fixed projection and the aim that it has chosen as its wanted goal? Question mark. An unforgiving thought does many things. In frantic action, it pursues its goal, twisting and overturning what it sees as interfering with its chosen path. Distortion is its purpose. Forgiveness, on the other hand, is still and quietly does nothing. It offends no aspect of reality, nor seeks to twist it to appearances it likes. What that means is it's not making it conditional. It's not saying to your brother, I will love you if you act a certain way to me. That is what it means by it offends no aspect of reality, nor seeks to twist it to appearances it likes. It merely looks and waits and judges not. He who would not forgive must judge, for he must justify his failure to forgive. But he who would forgive himself must learn to welcome truth exactly as it is. Do nothing then, and let forgiveness show you what to do. How sweet. How beautiful. You are loved exactly as you are right now. You know, God doesn't see the ego in you. The Holy Spirit doesn't see the ego in you. The Holy Spirit just sees this big beaming sunlight, because the voice for God, or God, overlooks the error entirely. And so even A Course in Miracles, it can be very tempting in order to, while the mind is still misidentified with the ego, to point out errors in others. But the whole point of forgiveness is overlooking the ego entirely and saying, oh my goodness, I have just misperceived you all along. I have just misperceived the world all along. As it says in Corinthians, I have just been misperceiving through a darkened glass. But if you take away that darkened glass, woo, how beautiful everything is. How lovely everything is and everyone is, because you are seeing truly. And so you are very loved exactly as you are. You don't have to change to be perfect. You don't have to get rid of the ego to be perfect, because the ego is an illusion. You are already perfect. You are already a being of love. And this is the joy of forgiveness. This is the practicality of forgiveness. It allows you to see yourself as you truly are. And the experience of this is gleeful. It's the gleeful experience of the present moment. It's the gleeful experience of the true self. Imagine just waking up and having this heart bursting all day long for no reason at all. There's no reason attached to this love. It's just love. You're just loving because you are love. And there's just this beam coming from your chest. You feel the heat coming from your heart chakra, as they say. You feel the heat of the love coming through. There's no problems anymore. You're in a problemless state of mind. And you are glad. You're happy for no reason. Until we see each other again, I love you very much.
Aloha, everybody.
Aloha.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.